We're going to move now into a facilitated discussion. So I'll ask our two patients, Julie and James, if you'd like to join us up the front here, and Mark. And I'd also like to introduce Anne Woollett. So Anne is the head of clinical trial programs at the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre. So, Anne, thank you for joining us. So we're able to take some questions from the audience, but I might do warming up question. And we haven't heard from Anne, so Anne, I've got to start with yourself. So Mark talked about Tele Trials as an answer to Julie's problem of living in Mildura and having to pay for her flights down to Sunshine. Maybe just explain a little bit more to the audience what is a Tele Trial and why you think it'll make a difference.
Sure. So Tele Trials is a new way of delivering cancer care. So what we anticipate is we've got a couple of different models, but what we anticipate is that there will be a patient will be so for example, in Mildura Hospital, they will be there with their local oncologist, and they will dial down using video teleconferencing to the oncologist that's based in Melbourne that is running the trial, and the doctor in Melbourne will check the eligibility with the oncologist in Mildura, ask about all the eligibility criteria. Are you suitable for a trial? The person in Melbourne will do the checklist. They will send up a consent form to Mildura, so the doctor in Mildura will be able to go through the consent form, and then the patient and the doctor in Mildura will have a chance to check with the doctor in Melbourne that they are happy, they've answered all the questions. And then depending on the level of experience and the level of confidence and the services and the resources that are available, some of the treatment may be able to be given at a regional or a rural setting. So that is sort of basically what we hope to roll out. There'll be different levels depending on level of experience and confidence, and does the local hospital have a chemotherapy unit. So some small hospitals may not have all the resources that are available, so they may have to come to Melbourne for some visits, or they may be able to have all their visits delivered locally. So that's our aim, and we're just working through how we actually get the drug to a regional centre, how we transfer all the information, how we report side effects and improvements in care.
Now, I think Professor Passion Mark Rosenthal wants to make a comment as well.
So there are some trials that should not be done in regional centres. So the trial I was trying to get the patient on this morning, 7 days in hospital is required. It's too much. It's too complicated. There's only 1 or 2 hospitals in Melbourne that can do that sort of trial. So it's also about the trial portfolio. There are trials we should not be doing in specialist centres. They can be done in regional centres and in the sort of outer metropolitan hospitals. And in fact, not just Tele Trials region, metro to region. How about Tele Trials from Sunshine to the Austin? Or Tele Trials from the Austin to Royal Melbourne? Because the portfolio of trials, we all try and do everything, and we've got to be much more rational about our trials. And so wouldn't it be terrific if you lived in Hoppers Crossing and there was a great trial at the Austin, but you think, that's as far probably, not from Mildura, but it's an hour and a half's drive. Let's have Tele Trials as a mechanism between hospital in Melbourne.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting. Now, we might go to the audience because I think we've got some questions.
Hi, good evening, all of you. My question is for Dr. Mark. I have done Masters in Biotechnology, and I'm willing to help as a volunteer what you're doing for clinical trials. Is there any procedure to follow as a volunteer? Because I face so many difficulties. I'm, meeting them personally, and I'm disappointed with that. So,
the doctors do about this much work, and then the research staff, whether they're research nurses or study coordinators, they do the bulk of the work and have to look over our shoulders and make sure we do the right thing, because, in fact, trials have become so complicated. And the patient I saw today, I actually took the protocol down and I was reading the protocol and the PICF before he came in just to make sure I had it clear. It's so complicated. What I would say is that there is a shortage of staff for research, as research staff, either as nursing staff or as study coordinators around Victoria. Regional centres are screaming out. There is a way of getting in, and we had a trials unit meeting here, sort of an open day almost, to try and attract people, and the place was packed, 240 people. So there is a reason to. You've got to start a bit low and work your way up if you've never been in it. But I think keep your eyes out for a position. You know, they're advertised all the time, and just look out.
And VCCC and are investing some resources in people that come from a science background to get skilled up in clinical trials. Just a couple of quick words on that, perhaps.
So we have a workforce program where we're trying to build, so we'll do a 40-week rotation through some of our bigger cancer centres to get people trained up, and then hopefully they will be a preferred person for jobs in the future.
So it's actually a really key issue. Now, I think we've got another couple of questions.
Yes, sorry, it's just seeking a point of clarification. When you actually look for candidates to participate in your trials, do you actually do something like a DNA cross-section to see if they're actually prone to a specific cancer or otherwise?
So the trials come in all shapes and sizes. Yeah. So there are generic trials. If you've got bowel cancer that's spread, you can go on the trial. Then brain cancer, for my type of cancers, there are trials, all comers. Then there are trials for over 70. Then there are trials if you've got a particular gene abnormality, and the treatment is for that gene abnormality, and there's no point being on that treatment if you don't have it. So there are some studies where everybody could go on, some studies that are much more related to age, and then studies which are very specific to a genetic abnormality in the tumour, not in the patient. And our experience, we had one study where we tested, we knew that the gene abnormality was 5%. We thought, well, if we find one or two brain cancer patients with that, great. We tested 55 patients and none had it. That's just bad luck. But, at least that was an option for the patients and they were all willing, did the right thing.
Maybe might ask Julie and then James to make comment here as well, because in some clinical trials, patients and participants are invited to have their blood tested for their genes to determine whether there might be something to be discovered in the genetic basis of their disease or the response to the drug. Julie and then James, did you get asked to participate in such what we often call it as a sub-study? Did either of you get asked to participate in such a sub-study? So shaking our heads.
That was a quick no from both of us.
Now I'm going to really put you on the spot now. So what if you were asked? So if the question was, would you donate some extra blood in order to determine whether there's anything in your genes that may determine why you respond or don't respond to a treatment, or even if there's any link with the type of cancer that you have to your genetics? Would you participate in such a so-called sub-study?
I would do anything to participate. I would absolutely do anything.
Yep.
And in fact, I hope that when I have to go off the trial that I'm on now, that I can find another one
Right.
that I can go on to. Mind you, the people who take my blood every month may not agree with that, as they work very hard to find a vein. But yes, I would. I don't know.
And James, what about yourself?
A blood left.
So James, you'd be happy to sign up to such a study if approached as well? Because we actually have, for that sort of study, it's a great question, I'm glad it was asked. We actually often have a separate consent form because it's considered very special to test your genes as to whether you're predisposed to some aspect of the trial or the disease under study. Now, I think we have another question up the front.
Yes, I have a question. You were talking about how there are a greater percentage of phase 1 trials now than in the past. What factors are leading to that?
Look, I can only speak for our trials unit here. 40% of our trials are first time in human, phase 1 early drug development. I think academic interest, ability to do it. Grant, I mean, I think it's it's the cutting edge, it's the most interesting, the most exciting. Most of my trials that I've done, I've probably done 70 or 80. I reckon 1 or 2 have ended up in a drug that went to market. Now, Peter Barlow, that first patient, is exactly the sort of example of someone who benefited, but the drug never went anywhere because most people didn't. And whatever my next trial is, that's going to be the one that goes fantastically well. In my heart, that's what I believe. So I'm optimistic. I don't do a trial unless, well, actually I said to the patient today, if I was, he said, what would you do? I said, if I was sitting in that seat, I'd go on this trial instantly. I really believe that. And I don't think any of us would ever be trying to consent a patient for a trial that they didn't believe in.
Actually, the other, I guess, interesting aspect, Mark, is that Australia's pretty good at phase 1 trials, right? I mean, there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies all around the world that are turning to Australia as almost sometimes the first port of call for a phase 1 trial. Why is that, Mark, do you think?
Because we're bloody good at it. We've actually, that old photo is the start of the phase 1 program, and it's been a 30-year journey of mentoring and teaching, and it's just been handed down and down. And so not every hospital can do it, not every hospital should do it, but most of the trials that we do as phase 1, first time in human studies, it'll be Peter Mac, the Austin, maybe Monash, New York something, Boston something, and one other. We are as good as anywhere. In fact, this is sort of slightly irrelevant, but the fellows, so these are sort of the junior consultants or the senior registrars, we've worked out that they're better off probably training here. So these are Australian fellows than going overseas. Everyone used to feel they had to go overseas to get good training. A bit of a cultural cringe, and we all did it. But now we reckon we're so good here that the fellows ought to spend 2 or 3 years training here, come from Sydney or Perth or somewhere, and train here rather than going to New York or London or elsewhere.
Okay, I think we've got another question over here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi there, I'm Johnny. I'm a doctor with a software company. I've got 2 parts of the question. Perhaps first for Julie and James. How did you both deal with the uncertainty of being enrolled in a trial? And then perhaps for our experts, is that something that we're concerned about for our patients? Are we doing anything, or what other supports that we have? So for Julie and James first, how did you deal with the uncertainty?
Do you want to do it? It is an emotional roller coaster. I think the whole diagnosis, just being told you have cancer, is an emotional time that we all deal with in our own way, and we all deal with it differently. For me, I felt very positive about the opportunity to be participating in a trial. I don't think I even thought what would happen if I wasn't able to be part of it. That was maybe I was being a little bit blind on that part, but I wanted to be involved, and I was going to make sure it would happen for me. Now, if my cancer had been the kind that wasn't appropriate for that trial, then I would have dealt with that at that time and perhaps looked for something else and worked in a different way. But I guess I approached it by, when that decision is made, then I will work out how I will cope with that and how I will deal with that. James?
What can I say? It happened pretty quick. I went in, it was mentioned. I think within a week they said you're in a trial. I thought, cool. Didn't have time to think about anything because there was more important issues at that time. Like you say, when someone says you got cancer, you fall apart a bit. The trials, from what I read, is the way to go. Yeah. I assume it works.
So,
I'm
James,
here.
you did your own little bit of your own reading just to make sure you're making the right decision to deal with that uncertainty?
I read a little bit,
Yeah,
but, there's only so much you can read that either spins you out a little,
yeah.
can send you down the wrong path too, and so, well, I'll make the most of what I've got. But with the trial, it gave me more.
Great. Now,
Still going.
Mark or Anne to make comment as well.
Look, it's about being honest with the patient and setting the bar at the right height. So, the way I explain clinical trials is what I've done today. It's about opportunity, it's about hope and optimism, it's realism. I tell them it might not work. I think one of the attractions of us doing phase 1 is actually it's appealing to patients. So, on the one hand, you get one hormone versus another in a big phase 3 or phase 4. That's great that you go on a trial. It's not that exciting, but it's done a great job for you. But if you're a brain cancer patient and there are no options, or have another operation, or you have a drug which has got almost 0% chance of helping, and we're talking about a drug which the one we've got, I think it's unbelievable science. And I say that. I always say it looks good in the test tube and in mice, but this might not work, and most of them don't. So it's about being honest and realistic. And actually, interestingly, I don't say take a week. I say don't agonise over it. Tell us tomorrow. Because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and it either feels right or it doesn't feel right. And it's very uncommon for patients to say no. I think that's the right decision. I mean, who would know whether it's the right thing to do or not? I'm always surprised when patients tell me that they're going on a trial in Norway because they've looked at the 200 trials in brain cancer that are running around the world and they've chosen the one in Norway. Well, I wouldn't know how to choose which one. So I think it's just being honest and straight up.
Okay, so
Do you want me to
some
just...
more questions up the back, and then Alison. Oh, Anne, you've got a comment.
I was
Sorry.
just going to say as
Yeah.
well, before a clinical trial can open, it has to go through a full ethical review process. So there's a very rigorous process that a trial has to go through before it can be opened. And then once a patient is on a clinical trial, they are supported by the research team, and so they're able. Consent isn't just signing a piece of paper and that's the end of it. We do encourage patients to keep coming back and asking questions and touching base with the research team and checking in the whole way through if they've got any questions along the way.
And we don't think about a trial unless we're sort of 90% sure that it's the right patient. So we're not going in completely cold. We've thought pretty carefully about it, and we know who would be almost certainly a suitable candidate.
I had a question about funding. One of the common themes has been the advantage of a clinical trial is that patients can access very expensive medication that they might not be able to access otherwise. And I'm just interested where you're seeing sources of funding come, particularly for the investigator-initiated trials, where that funding is coming from.
Yeah, so we distinguish, in the trials unit, we've got 154 trials running at the moment. 60% are what we call sponsored, so that almost certainly means Pfizer are paying for the whole trial. Every blood test, every scan, every nurse time, it's all paid for. And then the other 40% are non-sponsored, so sometimes there's money, sometimes there's not. They're investigator-initiated, and the two balance each other out. So the trial unit here and other trial units try and break even. We're not for profit, so we're not trying to make money. We try and reinvest any surplus. And the 60-40 seems to work pretty well. Sometimes it goes up to 70-30, so we've got to be careful. There are grants, so someone might have a great idea for a trial and they go to the NHMRC or some other funding body, and that provides some funding, not most of it, but some funding. State government gives $20 million to try and improve clinical trials, and we're going to spend $8.2 million on the investigator-initiated program. So, if a physio at Western's got a great idea, or a radiation oncologist at the Austin's got a great idea, and didn't have the wherewithal or the finances to take that trial ahead, then the program from the state government is going to assist.
Okay, and next up the back there, and I've seen two of you in the middle there and also the front, so we've got plenty of questions, so Yep.
This question, I'm from the University of Melbourne and we're obviously involved in clinical trials. This is a question about the risk, really, and liability profile attached to clinical trials. Yeah, they're obviously extremely valuable for the progress of science and all of that. But then how do you, as a business or from that point of view, address the risk and also the medical liability that could attach if something goes wrong? Or
You mean the safety risk?
Safety risk.
So the financial risk is significant for a trials unit. It's a hard business. The safety risk, I think, is terribly overblown. There have been a couple of dreadful examples from years ago where a whole lot of patients got sick and died. Hand on my heart, I can't think of a moment like that where these are cancer patients who most of the time have got metastatic cancer, it's spread, and it's not curable. These are the experimental drugs. So it's, the option of trying something experimental, you've got to weigh up potential benefit with the potential risk. Look, we are so careful about safety, and that's part of the sort of care and attention to detail and protocol, and someone notices that the blood test is slightly abnormal, whereas, I might not see it. Someone's noticed and something's done about it. So there's great care and attention to detail that makes all the difference. So the stories, there's been 2 disasters, one in Britain, and that was sort of poor management more than anything else.
Yeah, I might add to Mark that to my knowledge there has been not one legal case in Australia that has found an Australian institution liable for a bad outcome in clinical trials. So it's sort of 0 out of, what was the number? 10,000 patients in how long? About 10 years? Yeah, so it's 0. The other thing was very interesting a number of years ago, clinical trials were starting to get harder to do. And part of the reason was each individual hospital went off and spoke to their own each individual insurers, and that was getting really inefficient. And so the Victorian Medical Insurance Agency took over insurance for all clinical trials in Victoria, and then that became a complete non-issue. It was fantastic actually to see, for Madeline, the sort of work that you do in, making sure the process behind the scenes makes clinical trials work well. So yeah, there's been some really good initiatives there to reduce any real liability and issues that for the clinical trial system and for the patients, importantly. So the Victorian Medical Insurance Agency do get input into all the consent forms to make sure everything's there, and the system actually, that side of the system works really efficiently now. Now, I think Alison...
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
My question is directed to Mark. Yes, I know, I'm putting you on the spot. And it is, you said, look, if you want to, the best thing you can do about finding a clinical trial is just ask your doctor. Well, I actually don't think it's as easy as that, because the tumour stream that I'm involved with is melanoma. They are mostly diagnosed by your GP. So what do patients do? They come home from the GP and they look up Google, and invariably they'll find, some good sources, some bad sources, but often they'll come across a support agency, and if they go into those, they will find information about clinical trials, and that's good, that's great. So another pathway would be for the doctors, for the GPs, for you guys in the metropolitan areas to speak to your colleagues in rural and regional and the GPs and encourage their patients to go and look at these support and advocacy organisations on the internet. I'm just thinking of going in on another level because
I completely agree, and I'll say a few words about the VCCC program, but it depends on which stream. So I look after brain cancer. A lot of regional patients come in for their neurosurgery. Actually, I'm gracious enough to say the medical oncologists and the radiation oncologists in Bendigo, Ballarat, Shepparton, Border, Traralgon, Warrnambool are just as good as me. And the only thing they can't do usually is do clinical trials. They don't have the trials in brain cancer. So they know they can phone me. They know they've got my contact number, and they do. They get in touch at the time they need to get in touch. And I hand over the care of the patient, but not completely. And I say, the only thing I can do that they can't do in Warrnambool is I've got clinical trials. The moment you need to be thought of for thinking about a clinical trial is the moment the email can come to me or a phone call. So that connection's very close for brain cancer. For breast cancer, which is clearly huge, it has to be some other strategies, and Anne might want to talk to that.
Yes, so we have embarked. The Cancer Council in Victoria have a fantastic website which each public hospital inputs their clinical trials information into. And so we're working with the Cancer Council. We have a program at the moment about increasing awareness and just taking a moment to make sure that the information is current and meets the needs both of the clinicians and the patients, because we think it's really invaluable that you are able to go to a reputable source and get current and up-to-date information. And the Cancer Council has that information there.
It's actually on the advisory panel for
Fantastic.
that have been set up.
Yeah.
But I still think that there are a lot of patients out there, before they even get to a tertiary hospital, do not know about clinical trials.
Look, completely, yeah. And patient. Well, I think we're working really hard through the strategy that we're talking about. And, you know, there's a big difference between the patient that I've sent back to an oncologist with a brain cancer in Ballarat, who rings me at the drop of a hat for advice, and to the 75-year-old non-English speaking breast cancer patient in Altona, who maybe doesn't have that sort of network of clinicians. So what do we call the network? Connections? No. VCCC. Anyway, practice.
Okay, and I think there's gentleman two up from Alison was next, and then one further question after that gentleman.
Hung said that one role of clinical trials was to give access to drugs which are in use overseas. Why does the TGA or the PBS reject the trial information from Europe or America? And if so, why?
So Avastin, that Avastin story, and Peter Ward, the photographer, is the classic version. So that drug it was TGA approved, so I could prescribe it. You had to pay $3,500 a month, because the PBAC that sits there and adjudicates on whether a drug is truly worthwhile to provide essentially free for Australians, they said no. So I think that was a fair decision. It's hard to justify in a health budget spending $3,500 a month, month after month after month, on 1,000 patients, when the data, which we proved, it's not a particularly effective drug. So someone like Peter Ward and many other patients got that drug. There are 120 of them who got it. Many of them benefited, but not enough for the PBAC to say, you know what, this drug's so good, we're going to put it on the PBS. Whereas the venetoclax, that'll make a move very quickly. So the venetoclax story, patients got venetoclax, probably the first patient in the world got it at Royal Melbourne or Peter Mac. So lots and lots and lots of Australian patients got that drug before it was ever TGA approved or going on the PBAC. So it can work in reverse.
And can I just follow up with that question to ask Julie to respond as well, actually? So, Julie, the drug you received, so palbociclib, is not reimbursed on the PBS. You made that point. Tell us what you feel about that. You've contributed to this knowledge about this drug and its benefits, and yet Australian women with breast cancer don't have access. How does that make you feel as a research participant?
It's actually quite frustrating because when you do read the research, that it is approved in the US, it is approved in the UK, it is approved in Europe, and so automatically we think, well, what are we doing? Why are we behind? And why is it taking us so long to catch up to be able to produce this drug that is available anywhere else, and to have patients who I mean, there's a patient that I heard of who actually travels to Hong Kong every month to access the drug because that's the only way she can do it. And fortunately, her husband is on the health scheme over there that she can get it in that way. But that then goes down to very personal circumstances if you're able to afford to do things like that. So to know that that a drug that has been proven to help and assist in this way. And I take Mark's point that just because the US says it's okay, I worked in the US for 6 years, just because they said it's okay doesn't necessarily mean that we will follow. But I think the frustrating part that I'm finding at the moment, and I did read the whole response and why palbociclib was rejected in its initial application, but I'm finding it very frustrating now that the other drug, ribociclib, which does the same thing, is going to be, my understanding is it's going to be approved in the latest budget, but palbociclib isn't. And so there again, that's that inequality that I guess we have to work through and good part of.
So we might wind up, and I think just in winding up, want to lead on from Julie's point and that excellent last question, and that is that, you know, one can participate in different types of research. If one has cancer, it's not just a clinical trial of a new drug treatment. There is actually research underway around understanding the cost effectiveness of drugs, which is getting to the heart of, you know, why we should make the drugs available. And you know, Alison, who asked a question before, is involved in a project, Melbourne Melanoma Project, where now heading towards 3,000 patients have enrolled. And over the last 4 years, every one of those patients that's enrolled have given consent for access to their health economic data to actually understand the cost effectiveness of all these medical interventions. So those patients are involved in a clinical research study, contributing to our understanding about the cost effectiveness of healthcare to make these things more available. So just maybe the last word, if I may, from James. So I just want to touch on this. You know, we've talked a lot about new drugs and breakthrough drugs. And James, you've had a great outcome. You don't actually know whether you got the new thing or not, which is interesting. One thing I picked up on, you said to us that you got pins and needles. So we haven't touched on it, but if someone came to you and said, you know, we've got a trial of a new treatment to see whether we can make your pins and needles better or worse. So it's not trying to get rid of the cancer, it's actually trying to reduce the side effects. Is that something you'd be interested in? So reducing side effects of treatment?
Probably not really. It was minuscule.
Right.
Like if you got carpal tunnel syndrome, it's the same effect. Being an electrician, put up with that a lot. That's what I thought it was originally, but it turns out it was a side effect.
And what if, because it was fairly mild for you, but for some patients that pins and needles can be quite severe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry.
It's individual, isn't it?
Yeah.
For me, wasn't a problem. I could deal with it. For some people, it might have been a serious problem.
Yep. And Mark, you might make a comment about this as well, particularly eligibility and how you choose people that may or may not be suitable for
I reckon there's
trials.
been probably 5 or 6 moments in my career where I've gone, wow. And one of them was supportive care, where we would have to give huge doses of sedatives to guys having chemotherapy for their testis cancer and other cancers. We'd have to render them almost unconscious so they tolerate it and don't vomit. We're talking, you know, our time as registrars in the 80s and 90s. And then I remember seeing a photo, Henry Eckert, who was the professor of oncology at the Children's Hospital, showed a photo of 2 boys in beds next to each other. One had received a placebo, no drug. The other had received a new drug called ondansetron, which many cancer patients have now have. The first boy was unconscious because trying to stop him being sick, and the second boy was sitting up eating a McDonald's hamburger. that's a wow moment. Now that is, that's probably 5 or 6 in my lifetime. So, in fact, the GCSF, that old photo, that's a supportive care. That's not an anti-cancer treatment. It's a supportive care. So, we don't just think about chemotherapies or drugs that make cancer smaller. We try and make patients better and their quality of life better.
Yep. And James, did you have much vomiting during your chemo?
None whatsoever.
There you go. So that was due to that class of drugs, which some of my colleagues, Mark, have described the biggest breakthrough in their career in cancer treatments is that supportive care measure.
Well, I remember the photo from 20 years ago.
Yep. All right, so on that note, I just want to thank everyone for their attention. I'm going to give you some little take-homes from each of our speakers tonight. So I think we heard from Hung in detail about the process of clinical trials, which is rigorous and can give everyone confidence about the uncertainty question that we heard about earlier. James gave us that powerful message about altruism and the willing to help other people. James, fantastic for you to be on a trial. To this day, don't even know whether you got the real treatment. That's just fantastic altruism and contribution to fellow humankind. So thank you. Julie, one of the things I took home from your remarkable story is how your oncologist had to ring every hospital in Australia. So we need better systems for allowing people to find clinical trials. Wow. So what a powerful message. And Mark's message is simple. It's personal. It's personal. It's about patients. It's about their carers. It's about the people that care for them. It's all very, very important. And the clinical trials is how we make progress in a personal way for patients. So thank you, everyone, for your attention, and thank you very much to our panellists and speakers who've done an absolutely wonderful job. Thanks so much.